Hi, everyone. I'm Kim O'Kane, the Member Experience Specialist with the California Data Collaborative, and I'm really excited about this webinar today. It's the first of 2026. Hope you're all having a good new year. Um, One of the reasons that the three organizations hosting today wanted to do this is that we are initiating and launching a coalition for water data streamlining in California. And as we start to and roll out this project of data streamlining for regulatory compliance across the water industry, we really wanted to focus on better tools and practices to help us with our efforts, but also to help you understand if you're starting to do a data modernization project, how you can learn from what Timber and Patrick have done to help really make your efforts more efficient. So we're really excited for you today. If you don't know who the CADC is, I'll share that in just a minute. Just going to talk really quickly about who's on our call today. I'll do some speaker introductions. Patrick and Timber will give a short presentation, then we'll open it up for Q&A. So we invite you to put questions in the chat or into the Q&A itself. This is recorded and we will be presenting this on our YouTube channel. There'll be a link in just a minute so you can find the replay there along with the PowerPoint and some of the links that Timber has provided for you to do a little bit more research and get some more information after this webinar. So I'm Kim O'Kane. Like I said before, I'm with the California Data Collaborative. For those of you that don't know who we are a coalition of water agencies in California, and we really work together to collaborate on tools, software, resources so that water agencies can unlock, visualize, and analyze their data for more resilient water management. And we do that in a couple of different ways. One is through networking. We do a lot of webinars, workshops. We have different committees where people can come together in a safe space and really talk about the data challenges and solutions that they've found. We also have something called Data Science on Tap. So for our members, they can contact our office and really we act as an extension of their staff to help them with small data analysis projects. And then we have some proprietary software where we ingest build consumption data, and soon we'll be ingesting AMI data in some dashboards so folks can really do additional visualization of their data and help them with decisions. And then we have a research hub. So we work with researchers across the country on different types of projects to help our members and those outside of our membership really hone in on those ideas and struggles and concepts that they need support with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa and take it away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Melissa Malak. I'm Deputy Director of the California Water Efficiency Partnership, or CalWEP, as we are known. We are a nonprofit, and we really focus on maximizing urban water efficiency and conservation throughout California. Similar to CADC, we are a member-based organization, so we support our members through integrating and understanding innovative technology and practices, encouraging effective public policies, advancing research, training, education, and really focusing on statewide collaborative approaches and partnerships. So one of our partnerships we're really proud of is our partnership with the Data Collaborative and all the work that we've been able to work on related to data on the urban water use objective reporting that has come out in the past year and a half. So thankful to be part of this and happy to continue this partnership.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. And now I want to introduce Elisa Sinterk with the California Water Data Consortium.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. I'm Elisa Senturk. I'm the Senior Communications and Outreach Manager with the California Water Data Consortium, and I'm joining on behalf of our CEO, Robin Grimm. The consortium is an independent nonprofit formed through a partnership with state agencies and other leaders to help California build the data infrastructure needed for effective climate resilient water management. We, like many of you on this call, think of data as critical infrastructure, and much of our work focuses on kind of the less visible but essential pieces like protocols, standards, and governance, a lot of what the speakers are going to talk about today that allow for data to be interoperable, trusted, and usable across institutions. And we do this by working across the entire water data ecosystem, so with state agencies, local water managers, researchers, and practitioners, as well as community organizations. And we help them align approaches and reduce friction in how data is collected, shared, and applied. So thank you again to Kim and the Data Collaborative, CalWEP, Patrick, and Timber for including us in today's event.
Thanks so much. And now I want to introduce our speakers. If my PowerPoint will get moving ahead. Okay, there we go. Okay, so today we have Patrick Atwater. He's the Innovation Manager with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And Timber Stinson Schroff, he's the Program Manager of Summer Protocols. And Metropolitan Water District is one of our members. And Patrick had reached out a couple months ago and said, hey, we had Timber come and speak to our group, and we really found a lot of value out of it. And maybe it's something that you could share with a broader audience. And so we had an initial kickoff meeting, and we were like, yes, this is very interesting. I think we could all learn a lot from it. So I'm really excited to hand it over to Patrick and then Timber to carry this discussion forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim and team. Yeah, this is really exciting for me to share a little bit about some of our work with the Protocol Research Institute that Timber participated with. This came about, I manage the innovation program at Metropolitan Water District. We're a 96-year-old utility, have around 1,900 employees, pretty large and complex organization. I know folks here are working and talking a lot, and there's a lot of energy around protocols and streamlining how we within the water just share can be intricate. Oh, can you hear me all right? Or
yeah, you were cutting out a little bit, but it's okay now. Okay, thanks.
Sounds good. Yeah, the HTTP protocols, so all that. Yeah, and so we had Timber comes out of a kind of a very frontier research effort that was funded by the Ethereum Foundation that looks across, protocols and is very much an exciting kind of leading edge area. And, candidly, when we were talking about bringing that into Metropolitan, I was a little apprehensive, it's because like, hey, is this going to kind of come out of left field? Is this going to be a little avant-garde for folks? And it was very well received in terms of, and intuitively upon reflection, I think about, within Metropolitan and then within the water space, we're very protocolized entities. The context for the workshop that the pair of workshops that we did was around there was a CEO-led initiative that our innovation shop was tasked with helping to streamline our internal business processes. So that's kind of looking at not just data as digital information, but also looking at how within the organization, how we're doing everything from how are we processing a payment, procurement, hiring, how you're getting approvals for different things, who is involved, what are the steps, as well as all the different pieces around data and technology. So things around how do we share information, how do we use it, how do we make it information accessible. If you ever spend any time in the field within the water utility, there's a lot of safety protocols, there's a lot of SOPs, there's a lot of pieces there. And the piece that I find really fascinating, it's really fascinating, honestly very useful, is that Timber's research effort is been digging into what are the patterns and typologies across, not just within water, but just kind of protocols writ large. So within, technology, everything from like climate treaties to things around like SOPs, like what are the different patterns and uses that we can do there. And so I'm very optimistic about this kind of, fascinating area of very kind of leading edge research. And if I know that of great number of folks at Metropolitan were telling me after that they thought it was a really useful and insightful webinar. So I hope you find it the same. And I'll turn it over to Timber to take it away and give a little one-on-one on the fascinating world of protocols.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, the work we were doing with Met was really fun. I think that Yeah, I was also a little bit apprehensive, like talking to a bunch of the government people. I used to be one as well, about like what they would think about all this new weird terminology. I tried to keep it to a minimum, but overall it was quite useful. Specifically, like when we went in person, we were looking at like meetings and like how to be more efficient with meetings. We'll get into all of that. Kim, can we go to the next slide? First of all, I wanted to say I don't know too much about data or water. Had a little bit of experience working with Patrick's teams and in my past life working in occupational health and safety for a government in northern Canada up by Alaska, as well in like tech and tax policy for a government in southern Canada. So I've done some data sharing agreements like with like internal entities and external entities, but all in all, it's just a drop in the bucket of what everybody here is working on. So hopefully this stuff is helpful. My main idea here is can we come up with some new useful language that's going to help everybody here like work faster towards establishing shared data practices and getting the most out of data. I think when I was talking to Kim and Melissa and Elisa and Patrick, um, a lot of the stuff that comes up with data is, oh, we have all these competing standards. It's really tough to coordinate. All the collection mechanisms like aren't the same. These are all really good problems to have. In a sense, that means that like people are trying to get more out of their data. And as annoying as it is, it's like it's a good place to start from. So yeah, next slide. I want to start this presentation, which won't be too long, and anybody can hop in with questions in the interim. I'm happy to jump into the chat, keep an eye out for those. I want to talk about a story. It's based in California and it starts in a garage with a couple guys working on something, which seems to be like a lot of stories from California. This one is about two guys. One of them was David Lang, working on an underwater remote operated vehicle. And they were making these little drones to go around and collect information about the coast off of California, what the water's like, what fish are there, what kind of like ships are there, what are we going to get about temperature. And when they were making these little drones, one of the problems they ran into was like, oh, every time we want to connect a new sort of measurement device, we need this sort of connector and this sort of adapter. And it made their drone like this big and looking like a jellyfish when they wanted something that was more hydrodynamic. What they did in the end was not just make this really cool drone, but they did something more profound. Like in David's interpretation of what he did was they made a new standard for connectors. And this wasn't something they did as like an institution. This isn't something they did in their capacity as a startup or a company. It was just a couple of individuals that set out making like some coalitions and just doing disruptive standard making. So like I want everybody to think about their job, like working with data. It's like you're not quite an entrepreneur, you're not quite a bureaucrat, you're like some sort of hybrid, and it's really important work. Like obviously water is a critical resource. The advantage with data is that unlike water, you can use it as much as you want and it never runs out. So yeah, I just thought this quote from David and his essay, which I'll talk about more, is really helpful. I'll show a picture of the adapter that they came up with. But yeah, startups and companies get all the headlines, but the tools we use to cooperate, standards and protocols, drive an equal measure of civilizational progress. I think it's really important. Like right now, obviously, the only thing in the headline is AI companies, but there's a lot of important work that's going on in the world other than that. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. The three ideas I want to share with everybody today are tensions, so like leveling up how we think about engineering trade-offs and like conflict between actors, talking about how protocols fail. There are existing ones that fail. Sometimes protocols and standards fail to get off the ground. Why does that happen? How can we get around it? And lastly, like I was alluding to earlier, what is this different kind of entrepreneur in data, in establishing these protocols for sharing data and getting more out of it? What does it look like to be one of those entrepreneurs? What are some best practices and some things that we've learned through the Summer Protocolized Research Program. And you'll note, like in the bottom right of these slides, it says protocolized, it doesn't say summer protocols. We have a magazine that we're trying to, talk about more, and that's the name of the magazine. So we publish lots of stuff like this in there. We can go to the next slide. Okay, in let's say I think it was around the 70s or 80s, there's this guy, Eric Holnagel, who was a safety researcher, and he did all sorts of stuff with 3 Mile Island, the nuclear reactor that melted down on the East Coast. He's done stuff in nuclear and aviation, workplace safety everywhere. And he talks about this trade-off between efficiency and thoroughness. So the efficiency thoroughness trade-off, which is EDO for short. And one of the big things with data is all along the circle of things from like collecting it to assessing the risks to ensuring privacy, sharing it, analyzing it. There are lots and lots of steps along that process. And you can be efficient at doing it, or you can be thorough at doing it. You rarely can be both. Usually, so it's something like, okay, we're going to make a data standard for our own use. It's going to be really quick. It's just going to serve you and your immediate team. Like, we need to standardize how we collect the water temperature at this station. We just want it to be quick, one piece of data. We all know how it's done. We know the piece of equipment. It's not really a big deal if it's interoperable with other people's standards. We just need it like that for our analysis. And since it doesn't involve anybody's personal data, it doesn't need to be private. Pretty easy. That's very efficient. On the other hand, you have like thorough data standards, which would be like, this is somebody's like personal home water use. It's associated with their address. We know how much water they're using. There's some sort of connection between that location in our like, um, you know, GWS system. We know where they're going to be. So we need to make sure that this is very protected. You need to be thorough in your approach to data in that sense. And what tends to happen a lot of the time is either things are too thorough or things are too efficient. And when people have these conflicting setups for their data pipelines, you run into issues. They're not compatible, not just in the engineering level, but like at a philosophical level. If you're trying to get people to go from, okay, we make data standards for ourselves, and these are useful immediately, to, all right, we need to make a data standard for us and like three partners, it really limits what you can do. It limits how quickly you can move, and it's difficult. You need to have some sort of body that's like legitimate, that everybody believes in, they'll follow their advice. Otherwise, these things tend to falter and not do so well. So this EDO, or the efficiency trade-off, is the kind of like hidden engine that you're considering in this process. And I think every time you walk into a room and like there's a disagreement, oftentimes it'll boil down to a disagreement over efficiency versus thoroughness. And it's a good thing to bring up. Who's made this decision? Did we inherit it? Is this standard just like really, really rigid and doing too much? Should we be more efficient? And so on. Think of it just as a frame to get yourself unstuck if you ever have to consider it. And we can move to the next slide. And another note here is that with tensions, and you'll run into tensions as you like go on and build alliances with people and data. One anecdote from my experience, that um, the government I was working with, we wanted to share data between three groups who had like very competing interests in what they were trying to do, like an insurance company and like a workplace safety board. Immediately, like these are totally two companies at odds with each other. So it's like, all right, we don't want them to merge into one institution because that would, ruin everything for both employees, the employer and the workers. The tension between those two organizations is what makes it work. You need to have insurance processes that are like trying to raise rates, and you need to have like workplace safety boards that are trying to be more diligent with data collection, more diligent with their campaigns, try and like improve workplace safety outcomes to keep the rates down. On both sides, that's what like leads to a good outcome in the long run. So that fundamental trade-off is not something that you're going to get rid of. It's something that's always going to be there, and you shouldn't worry about that. Keep it there. That tension is almost always productive. The example I like to give is like natural ecosystems. When you take out the wolves of a out of Yellowstone, all the deers grow out of control, eat all the vegetation, you get this trophic cascade. Same thing happens in institutions and organizations. You want to keep everybody in play, even if they're frustrated. Everybody has something to add. That means that when you're working on data stuff, it's not just an engineering problem. You're not just, okay, we need to establish this standard. We need to get this protocol set up between these databases and then things will work. It's like, no, there are people that have very strong feelings about what to do and why you should do it. These tensions are always a combination of engineering and cultural factors. So you can't just go in and engineer a cultural problem away. The same way that you can't just go in as an executive into a problem with databases and be like, can't everybody just get along? Can't we just set this up and like all share data? They're very hard, like engineering things to do with security and data integrity and quality that need to be done by an engineer. Not to mention measurement, which is this whole other suite of issues that I'm sure everybody has to deal with, like how much are we going to spend on measurement? What sort of devices do we use? How often do we replace them? So when you're coming into problems with data and setting up shared data streams and pipelines, keep in mind that it's not just about engineering, and it's also not just about culture. Like these groups that you work with will have some interests that are different than yours. They'll prefer efficiency over thoroughness or vice versa. Um, yeah. The way that we ended up getting around the data sharing issue that I had here in the Yukon was as annoying as it was, I found out that this guy that we were working with who we just like couldn't, get past this one technical problem on. He was volunteering at some sort of race association for like river racing and like I figured that out, and then I figured out that he likes this particular type of coffee, and then I showed up to his office a couple times with that particular type of coffee, and it's like, okay, that's kind of an outrageous way to solve a problem for data pipelines, but at the end of the day, if you have to spend like $10 to have a much better time in your work life for the next 3 years, it feels like a tremendous investment. So keep that in mind. Keep Edo in mind that the sufficiency thoroughness trade-off is like always present. People have different opinions about it beyond just the technical trade-off. Um, yeah, we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so I'll talk about Edo a bit more just because it's so useful. I think that, and I've written about this before in this article called One Tension to Rule Them All. You can have different tensions, things like safety versus productivity, transparency versus privacy. There are many different ways to formulate how people disagree about things, about fundamental engineering trade-offs. Edo is to me like the most useful and portable one. So if you just have to remember one tension, it would be Edo. I think it maps to a lot of the problems in data very well, and it's easy to remember. You can also use it to analyze like how protocols typically fail. So they can be too efficient, they can be too thorough, and they can be too rigid or too fluid. First ones are obvious. When something's too thorough, it restricts everybody. You have too many criteria to stand up to. This happens a lot in big organizations where like by default, you're breaking 50 policies just because you don't know about them. You have this gigantic book of things that you're supposed to do, and because you can't read it all and do your job, you're immediately in the red, which isn't a good thing. That's too thorough. Too efficient means that everybody's just operating off the seat of their pants and, trying to do things to fix stuff right away without thought about maintenance, without thought about future costs, about repairs. And you have this efficiency failure where it's just very, very short term. Nothing's done with like reducing long-term costs in mind. You're just trying to fix things as they come up, playing whack-a-mole. and you're looking for quick wins. But the other types of failure for protocols are different. This efficiency thoroughness trade-off is not something that's solved forever. At different points in time, you'll move along that curve. You'll be more efficient or more thorough. One classic example of this is, if you're looking at a wildfire situation, people have to move very, very quickly. The cost of not taking action is far greater than the cost of taking the wrong action. You can take wrong actions and fix it in an emergency situation, but if you just stay still, you don't do anything, then something's going to get out of control and you can no longer fix it. So when you're trying to look for optimal solutions in an emergency situation, you're doing the wrong thing. But it points to the need for you to be able to be flexible because there will be emergency situations, there will be, normal peacetime scenarios as there are in water management. Sometimes your reservoirs are full, 30% more than they have been for the past 10 years. Sometimes they're really low and you need to take more drastic measures. Sometimes things break and you need to fix it right away. Sometimes you have a maintenance problem that you're going to need to find a permanent solution for. So the rigidity comes from when the protocol has become oriented towards thoroughness or efficiency and ceases to budge. There's nobody in the organization for some reason that can move it one way or the other. You've got this like protocol about measurement that, for some reason, everybody is just, we're doing our own thing. We're going to measure data. We're not going to give any consideration to like what the big picture use of this data is. We're just going to set it up for ourselves. And if that's permeated how everybody does their stuff, which I really doubt is the case here because everybody is here trying to figure out how to work together on data and this water data movement that's growing, you're not going to run into that. But if that's just the base case, like, and you can't budget, that's a real big issue because a thorough protocol that's rigid is going to work well when everything else is working well, but when an emergency strikes and all of a sudden that protocol is still being enforced, you've got real big issues. Too fluid is another problem. So one of the things that happens in organizations, I've seen over and over and over, and I have been both a victim of and somebody that's like been that annoying person, is that you come in, you've got these really good ideas, but like the people that have been there for 20 years have heard it time and time again. They've seen it. It's super annoying. Some hotshot comes in, tries to change everything, and then they're out of there in 6 months and nothing happens, nothing sticks because the protocol for what you're supposed to do constantly flip-flops. So when you're trying to establish something new, you do at some point need to commit to it. And one of the best things that you can do in this situation as somebody working in data, working on standards and protocols, is occasionally helping somebody out who you don't even agree with. Just get on board with them and help them achieve what they're trying to achieve and get to that point where something gets done rather than contribute to the continual fluidity and some issues that arise from that, which is false starts, trying to do stuff, a bunch of wasted documentation and man hours. These are all problems that happen when protocols are too fluid. And yeah, I've written this up with like some more like thought out examples if you want to read about it. I think it's a great term. But yeah, the next thing I want to talk about, next slide, is like a different way to think about failing protocols. So there's this really, really great researcher who we've worked with. Her name's Nadia Asparova. She's done awesome work on open source software systems. She's worked with Stripe. She's worked on some great ideas about how we share information, how information becomes legitimate versus not, how we develop trust with each other. And she came up with this index for how to evaluate protocols. And you can interpret this in kind of a broad sense. Like a protocol is like how we're going to communicate about this issue, or what kind of like standard we're going to set for data, or how these two databases will communicate with each other. I think one of the most profitable interpretations is protocols are how two entities interact, whether that's between two databases, between two people, between a person and a database. What are the rules of engagement for how two people communicate or two entities communicate? So when we go beyond Edo and we think, okay, how do protocols fail? How do standards fail? When you're working in data, a lot of the time you're trying to start a new standard, enforce one, promote one. And when you fail to do that, that standard kind of goes away. But that's just one way that standards fail. It doesn't always mean that they disappear and they no longer work. I think a lot of standards and protocols continue to exist, and that is a sort of failure. They used to do something really powerful, maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, like in an institution like Metropolitan Water District, which is almost 100 years old. There's stuff that used to work there that no longer serves what that organization is trying to do. So it doesn't disappear. Failing doesn't mean disappearing. This handout, which is just one page, I think everybody should print it out and just like take it and be like, okay, the protocols that I work with, the standards I work with, do they meet a lot of these like negative criteria? Like, should we look at changing them? Who could we talk to change it? Who's in charge of the Edo distribution for this protocol? Protocols are always a trade. And when it comes to data, a lot of the times you're giving up time, you're giving up some freedom, you're giving up potentially a little bit of security. Um, in the case of consumers, you're giving up a bit of control of your data. Is like a very kind of delicate situation. You have to give up a lot. Benefit is that now you have all this data that everybody can use to assess trends with regards to reservoirs, water quality, so on. Whatever you guys do and however you monitor your infrastructure is going to get a lot better if you have more data. So you have to deliver on that promise. Um, yeah, there's a link to it in this slide deck. I think Patrick can probably drop a link to it as well. One page, great printout. Um, so a protocol has to deliver on its promise. Everybody that follows the protocol gives up some time, some freedom, some energy, some trust, and then in return they get back better water management. They don't have to think about whether or not they'll be able to get enough hot water, cold water, fresh water. They won't have to worry about, are we going to run out of water in 30 years kind of thing. That's a great thing to get. But if a protocol just becomes this overbearing thing, I would say it's not delivering on that promise. All of a sudden, people are giving up stuff and they're not getting much in return. So you see this with like, to pick on like one government organization, like the TSA. Arguably, the TSA has swung a little bit too far to the thorough side, and maybe they could be a little bit more relaxed about what they do. Airline safety has like never been better. It's safer than driving. There's a huge opportunity cost to investing more in the TSA versus something like investing in road safety. Everybody's given up a lot of um, time and energy and privacy to the protocols of the TSA, and what they're getting in return isn't all that great anymore. I think it's a little bit not worth the investment that everybody gives up. The bottom line here is feedback loops are important. When you establish protocols in the data space, when you establish standards, you should try and figure out are are you getting information back? Do you know it's working? Do you know when it's not working? Do you know when the costs are really brutal? If you have a lot of thoroughness without feedback, you're going to run into problems. It's very easy to pile on new standards, new protocols, new policies without really paying attention to their effects. So where you can, like try and establish a feedback loop between, okay, we made an agreement with this group to share data. Is there a positive result coming out of that that people can see? what are the costs of it? Do we have a good sense of like what the costs of doing this are versus the benefits? And do we have a clear picture of like how we can continue to build up this like coalition of data sharing and the vision for like what kind of value that that would unlock? Um, yeah, again, great handout just to have on the side of your desk to think about, all right, is this thing I'm working with totally crappy or is it useful, even if I don't like it? Yeah, next slide, please. So that photo on the right is the bristle mouth connectors, the blue or the black piece and the white one. So these are like inputs and outputs. And David and his team came up with this standard, even just as like a few people working on this thing. They weren't part of the big institutions in underwater robotics. They weren't a company really. They're just like, this is super important because we need to have more data on our oceans. If we can build this and make it ubiquitous, open source, and cheap, we are going to get more data. So it's this enabling layer. And they're not doing this to profit from it. I think one of the problems with protocols is that they don't fit into the like startup playbook. They don't fit into the like political playbook. Like when you do it, you don't get a ton of fame. You're not going to be in office necessarily. I don't think a lot of people are going to start taking photos of you on the side of the street in Los Angeles. And you're also not going to get probably $1 million investment or like $100 million seed round because of the work you're doing. But it is really rewarding work. Like when I talked to David and I spoke to his co-founder Eric, I think once. The thing that they're most proud of isn't the drone they built, it's the standard that they made, the bristle mouth connector. And I think it's really cool to see this happen because when you do that, it just enables so much other interesting things to happen that you're not related to necessarily. They never collected data like on the types of crabs on the ocean floor or like ocean acidity levels. But like because they made a couple of wires that everybody can use, now everybody can do that. Everybody's going to improve a situation. When you help make a standard for sharing data between two groups, it's like that's an achievement, but it's like all the follow-on knock-on effects that are really like you get to take credit for that, and that's really cool. Um, I'll note too when David talks about his work with the Bristlemouth standard that he says even engineering standards revolutions are cultural movements. At certain points in, engineering scenes, there's kind of this moral or ethical obligation to like get together and set standards. I think we're seeing this based on some timelines that Patrick shared with me from like 2015 to 2025, but the growing water data movement in California and more broadly, people understand that this is an important problem. People feel an obligation to work together, and this is a really great time to like live up to that and be kind of a role model for others in terms of this. In some sense, because you don't fit into the startup mold or the politician mold, there isn't a built-in incentive for you to do this beyond just like it being the right thing to do, even if it's a little difficult. So yeah, I think it's an exciting place for the wire data movement to be. I think that a lot of people really appreciate open source right now, given like all the troubles culturally we have with like proprietary systems. I think that working in open source stuff is generally re well regarded. And you get to be disruptive too. I don't think it's boring. I think that when you make standards and when you like break through these really difficult barriers with like data sharing, you're being disruptive. You're causing a bit of a fuss and you're allowing something great to happen. So remember that your problem is a good one to have. The idea is, though, that you have to get started, you have to commit, you have to make coalitions. And a lot of the times when you make coalitions, uh, you're not going to agree with the decisions made, but it's important that you go along with it because the next time you're going to need all those people to make that decision again, and maybe that time it'll be your idea, and then you'll be able to like go along with it with a lot of energy. Yeah, I think that this is an important thing to pay attention to, and yeah, kind of the last thing I want to talk about, we can get into a bit of a Q&A afterwards. Yeah, next slide is David Lang's playbook for this. This was from his essay. I think if you have the time to read it, it's about 5 or 6,000 words. It is well worth your time. He's a great writer. He's a very reluctant writer, which means that he's probably one of the better ones. If you like to write, maybe you aren't in touch with your audience too much, but he knows that it's a great story to tell, and he reluctantly told it. So here it goes. Very simply, first thing you want to do is get something working. Whether that's a prototype, whether that's like a mock-up of how these two databases might talk to each other, whether it's a standard, whether it's like you actually go out and get the new measurement device and set it up and show how it works. Maybe it's a demo to consumers about how it's privacy preserving technology. The key here that's different with Lang's interpretation of standards making is that he takes a very bottom-up approach. This isn't like you go to the standards body and you say, "Hey, I think we need this." And they say, "All right, we're going to make ISO standard 24528.9/825, and everybody needs to comply with it. We're going to put it in our newsletter, and then hopefully everybody sees it. Otherwise, they're out of compliance. We'll invest in some enforcement mechanism that like randomly audits people once every 6 years." And then effectively you have a standard, but it's not a very energetic one. So that's why David Lang was like, start by building it, start by getting something working, and then you gain traction and adoption, and only after that do you backfill with the committee work, the administrative work, finding that organization that will like make it official. And if that doesn't exist, you just make your own organization that makes it official. You can spin up a working group, a committee. It's very easy to make something official. I think that oftentimes there will be something that looks like what you need, and if it doesn't quite serve your interests, maybe you're better off just making a new committee that has some legitimacy that involves the right people. But this playbook looks a lot more like what somebody making a product would do, like a new type of Q-tip or a new type of eraser or like a sponge with a smiley face on it. Like they're just gonna make the thing, find people that like it, tweak it a bit, and then they'll go and do like, all right, now I'm gonna make a legal entity, now I'm gonna make a trademark, and so on. Dealing with all of the like administrative stuff last is somewhat unfamiliar, especially in the public sector setting. But I think probably like many people on this call will know, when you actually look at the work, there's a lot of you just have to get it done. Like I think that as much as there's these processes in place, and like in both the US and Canada, I haven't worked in the US public sector. It's very command and control. You have a mandate, you're supposed to execute on it. There's a chain of reporting. You're not necessarily supposed to go talk to like somebody else that's like up and to the left or up and to the right from you in the org chart without talking to your boss or your boss's boss. But a lot of the time, that's really how work gets done. And like for what it's worth, like the little slaps on a wrist for being for showing initiative are probably worth it. Um, I won't take any liability from that advice since I haven't worked in the U.S. But I do think that there's a lot here from David Lang's essay and Nadia's essay on like how protocols fail, as well as the work from Eric Holnagel to draw on. So yeah, just remember to look up, pay attention to like the efficiency, thoroughness trade-off at play. Remember that that is supposed to move over time. Sometimes you're supposed to be more thorough. Sometimes you're supposed to be more efficient. Don't be afraid to ask, like, if those standards or protocols are no longer serving you, or check yourself and be like, this thing actually is good. It just sucks to comply with. but the long-term vision and what it's going to enable are great. And then, yeah, in terms of being a protocol entrepreneur, you're not going to fit into like any existing pipeline with that kind of personality or job description until you run into somebody else that's doing the same thing, and then you're going to really get along with them. Yeah, I'm excited to see what California does with its water data movement and what Kim and Elisa and Chris and Melissa and Patrick are up to. I think I have one more slide. Can't remember. Oh yeah, just references. This slide deck should be available. You can click on any of these to read them. All freely available if you find it interesting. Yeah, we've got lots more of this on our websites. Yeah, there's a magazine about this stuff, protocolized. Patrick has written about them. They have a great case study in there. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Timber. And I'll keep the questions coming. And Kim, I see you coming off camera as well. But there was a question from Jackie, which I thought was a good one that I wanted to respond to, which was, what is an example of a protocol in the water space that is too fluid or too rigid? Timber, I'd be curious to your thoughts broadly, but I could kind of offer a couple of experiences. One, there's an adage in ops that the worst notification or alarm is the one that never goes off because you kind of get desensitized to it. So I think that, those types of, I think of notifications of particularly, there could be a pattern of, I've had this in different utilities I've worked at where there could be a lot of reply all emails. And it's not necessarily clear like who's being escalated to. So it's kind of fluid and there's some sort of issue, but it's very fluid and amorphous. Um, a protocol that is too rigid, I would say, one that comes to mind is around arguably procurement, where we design a lot of processes that are very rigid for kind of making sure everything's auditable, rather than necessarily thinking about, okay, what's the best public outcome and how do we achieve that? I think also to, what Kim and company are all working on with this coalition for streamlining, I think that's trying to nudge things from the thoroughness and too rigid to towards a little bit more efficient. But I had a question that I was going to ask Kim and our other NGO folks here. What as you see like the efficiency thoroughness trade-off, what are your kind of thoughts or reflections on that for the streamlining water data reporting effort?
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were talking about it. And yeah, right now we're just in the initial phases of getting our core group together and figuring out exactly what the end goal will be. And so right now we know that there's a lot of duplicative reporting and there's a lot of reporting that just has to be done. And how do we, you know, how do we make it more, if it needs to be more efficient for agencies to be able to report, especially some of these small agencies that really just do not have the manpower or the resources to do all this like monthly, annual, biannual reporting. So it's like, how do we help them with capacity building on that side, as well as like the thoroughness of the data that's needed to actually address the water management issues at a state level, but also at the local level. Like a lot of this reporting is just being piled up to the state. We're not really sure how they're using it. But also, how can we get that data back into the hands of the reporters so that they can use that for their own management? So it really is this like, where are we on that? I think we're we're kind of at both extremes. And we're trying to figure out how to come more into the middle.
Melissa, were you gonna add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kim hit it really well, but I, I think, maybe that's kind of the conversation of like the too fluid, too rigid is you had a lot of these legislation and data reporting requirements kind of come maybe as reactionary to drought, to stuff like that. It's like, we want to answer this question, we want this data specifically. And it's like maybe that wasn't the right data to answer the question. Maybe we need to like holistically relook at what is the question that's being asked? What's really the intent of it? What is it that we're trying to use for good decision making? And go back to kind of the origin and take a look at that again, and then say like, well, we can't just make up data to answer a question. We need to make sure that the data is grounded in what people actually have access to, what they can actually use. And then I think Kim said it perfectly as well when it comes to data is making sure it can be used for data action, right? At the end of the day, we want to make sure we're using data for action purposes and not just to check a box. And so however we can make sure that the data is usable is also really important and something that needs to be considered in kind of the process of protocol.
Yeah, one thing I'll say too is like as soon as you feel like you're being both like you're at the extremes of efficiency and thoroughness, and you're like, okay, well, what are we trying? What's the goal here? Like the next step. It's like you want reporting to be more efficient, like everybody does. And like one of the great things that Holnagel talked about was that anytime you want efficiency, first you need to establish some thorough like processes. Like you need to be very thorough in how you set things up to be efficient, like to the point where it drives everybody crazy. And like one of the classic examples, um, regardless of your feelings about Amazon, one of the great things they did was the famous Bezos memo, which is every unit in that organization needed to set up their own API for all their data so that any other unit could query it. So like, okay, you have your data and we're going to have it searchable so we can pull it whenever we want. And every team was like, are you serious? Like we have to set all this stuff up. Like this sucks. But it allowed them to move so quickly later on. And it also
Mm.
ended up being the foundation for Amazon Web Services. So like it might seem so ridiculous to slow down when you're trying to be efficient, but like that is what you need to do. And it often comes with like pretty tough mandates that everybody needs to follow. So generating that buy-in top down when you have like a crazy person like Jeff Bezos is one thing, but like in this sort of situation it's probably going to need to be a lot more collegial and like, all right, guys, like let's commit and grit up and do this.
Yeah, I will say on that note, in kind of the spirit of Zachary's comment about some of the questions used to be valid and but are not, that's actually kind of echoes what Secretary Crowfoot said at the Data Summit, which was around how, it's easier sometimes to add additional requirements and not revisit the other ones. I will say I've been less involved than like uh, Lindsay McPhail out of WRM at Metropolitan has kind of been more plugged into the streamlining coalition. But like whenever I poke my head in and see what you all are up to, definitely been very impressed at how thorough it's been looking at it from like legislative to like the administrative to like the technical to like the data nitgrit of like timber going from the level of like what are the different fields and parameters and like what are the different data definitions because like harmonizing like residential isn't just always residential and like how is MFR different and like like there's just a lot of nitgrit for all this stuff. um I was going to circle back on the fluid and some of the water space examples. Timber, do you have any kind of intuitive examples for fluid versus too rigid from just kind of you know being a water consumer or things like that, or something that would be intuitive that would be water adjacent that would help circle back on that question?
Yeah, I would say um, from a consumer perspective, when you look at guidelines, when guidelines are changed a lot, you get like fatigue. As a consumer, you're like, oh, I thought I was supposed to be doing this, but actually I'm supposed to be doing that. Um, Uneven enforcement. Um, that's a like a very, very classic like efficiency and thoroughness trade-off where like as an auditor or an enforcement agency, it's much more efficient to do spot checks because like you're getting, a good sense of like who's complying with like volume for watering their lawn versus like who's not. You can't monitor every single lawn in the state because you like bankrupt your department. Um, so you have to rely on spot checks. But for consumers, like if you're the one getting your lawn audited, for example, that wouldn't really feel fair.
Yeah. I see we had another question. Ethical sourcing of data. Maybe Renee, you can elaborate a bit more in the chat about the question. Um, Another kind of reflection for Kim, Melissa, and Alyssa, at the protocol entrepreneurship. Any thoughts on that? Because I think that was very much in line with kind of what you all are up to. Where I think about some of I know there was with the making a conservation a way of life and the urban water use objectives reporting, like the CADC is in many ways there's some prototypes and CalWEP and doing things around that. So there's definitely been prototypes and then kind of that adoption. But I was kind of curious if you had any reflections about that playbook and the protocol entrepreneurship there. And then we'll circle back to Renee's question.
Yeah, we can even, Renee, if you wanna ask your question, I can open up I can unmute you. See if that, yeah, hi. Do you wanna explain a little bit more about your question?
First, we'll do a test. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, there you go.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. Ages ago, I attended a data summit. This was in, LA at whatever the big tall building is. And really what I left there with was the ethical piece of it. Organizations just going in, taking data, get to a water agency, all of their consumers, just grabbing data and doing whatever they wanted to with it. Recently, last summer, I went to chief data officers information symposium in Cambridge, and it really is this thing about. Uh, I'm sure you all have to know this. Just data out there, people grabbing it, doing whatever they want with it. Not too much ethics behind where they got it, what they're doing with it. So that's just a question for me that started back then, and I'm like, wow, this is really blown up to even more of an issue than it was then. Wow. So, and let me know if that doesn't cover it.
I think it does. Kim, do you want to take some thoughts or?
yeah. So in the water industry is very risk averse. And so there are a lot of standards and protocols in place around security. And this is a big question that comes up all the time, especially like Timber was talking about sharing data. And sharing data is very difficult. And that's part of the reason we wanted to have this conversation is so that we can start to understand like where those barriers are and how we can break them down. Um, we do collect a lot of data as water suppliers, but it's behind closed walls. And agencies are not just going to start sharing data just for the purposes of sharing. There's got to be contracts and agreements in place. And typically, even like the software that we've developed for our member agencies, we don't even collect all of the data that they have. We just collect what's needed for them to visualize the data sets and data points that they need, but we're not collecting confidential information about customers and things like that. And there are reasons for that because we certainly want to make sure security and privacy
Okay. So it
are
sounds like it's
taken
gotten better.
seriously. I don't think it was
Sounds,
ever necessarily a problem for the water industry.
well, not if you're the one taking the data and you're good with what you got and you don't really care about asking permission, sure.
Mm.
One thing I will say about the water industry, it's quite hard actually for people to get data out of their software systems. It's not as easy as you think. That's one of the reasons that we exist as a nonprofit is because
That's good to hear. I'm glad
yeah, we
because
have to actually
cybersecurity
help
is an
them,
issue.
yes, figure out how to actually unlock the data that's in their software systems. A lot of these vendors, it's essentially like a black box. And so that's one of the things is helping them figure out how to get that and how to put it into a dashboard so they can make better decisions. But Patrick or Melissa, even Chris, if you want to jump in.
I think you did it pretty good. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour. Are there any final questions that folks have for the group? Maybe what we could do is just do a quick lightning round with other folks. Kim, Melissa, Alyssa, Chris, if you had like one small takeaway, from protocols, what would it be?
I'll start. Just start. And I think we're trying to incorporate that right now, right, Melissa?
Yeah, I think what's also important with like any protocols is your priorities. What do you want to accomplish now, slash what also could be the vision long term, right? Like example that Timber said with Amazon, if you hadn't set it up that way first, you might not have been able to do that later, right? And so kind of thinking long-term vision, and I'm a planner. I love planning. I think that's also really good to just start having conversations.
Alyssa?
Yeah, I actually really like the term protocol entrepreneur, and I feel like that's a lot of what we
Mm,
do as partners on this
yep.
call. And then I think my big takeaway is like flexibility, like protocols, yes, but also building in flexibility and being able to respond.
Very good. Chris?
Yeah, going back to the state reporting example, I really like these sort of two dimensions that you defined, Timber. And I almost feel like, I don't know, maybe we're in the realm right now with the state reporting where it's sometimes things are too fluid, but also too thorough. So it's like you got a lot of really thorough stuff that comes at you very quickly sometimes without enough preparation. So maybe we need to dial both of those dimensions back just a little bit.
It's a good plug to take a look at the essays that were mentioned, which if it, find one to find your favorite. The Kafka Index, which kind of hints at what you're talking about, Chris, with like both too thorough and too fluid, is a good one, and it's like a one pager that you can kind of keep up. I actually have it in my office, and sometimes people look at it, and it's fun, and we talk about it. So that one's fun. And Timur, any final thoughts, and then we'll say goodbye to everyone.
Yeah, I will say that like just to Chris's point, just to wrap up, yeah, you get a lot of requests for being thorough, like a lot of things get bolted on, and there isn't a lot of feedback. So like if you get a request to do something thorough, an extra requirement, make sure there's a feedback loop to test it. And if there's not, like insist that there be a sunset clause on that thing, whether it's a year, 2 years, 6 months, like
Mm,
set an expiry date on that request so that you have to revisit it.
that feels wise. Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
thanks for having me. I
thank you
really
so
appreciate
much.
it.
Yeah. So this is recorded. We will be posting that on our YouTube channel, and you'll get an email when it's up this afternoon. So thanks again, Timur, Patrick, Melissa, Alyssa, and Chris for joining us, and everybody out there. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, and I can get you in touch with Timur as well. All right. Thank you. Have a
Thanks,
great
Good
day.
everyone.
luck.
Thanks, everyone.